History remembers Henry VIII. History remembers Anne Boleyn. History remembers Thomas More. But behind them all stood a man that very few truly understood. A blacksmith's son who became the absolute most powerful advisor in all of England. He built a king's revolution. He reshaped a nation's faith. And he completely rewrote the balance between crown and church. Yet every single step upward carried him closer to his own destruction.
So, let's get right into this explainer. Was Thomas Cromwell a visionary, a villain, or simply the only man willing to make impossible choices? We're looking at someone whose historical infamy completely overshadows the complex reality of his actual power. To some, he's a brilliant reformer. To others, a ruthless political operator. But what if we refused both of those easy answers? What if instead, we looked at the real machinery of how power alters a person?
To do that, I want you to imagine history pausing for one impossible evening. A posthumous trial where history's most powerful ghosts are gathered in a single room. We've got Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, Thomas More, Cardinal Wolsey, and Thomas Cromwell. No executions, no politics. Rank no longer protects anyone. It's just one final conversation where these historical titans must finally answer for their choices. Could power ever leave a good person unchanged? Was loyalty stronger than ambition? Can history ever judge anyone fairly? The answers they give might just change how you see one of history's greatest political minds.
Act 1. The Anatomy of Power. We're going to look at how everyday compromises slowly bend a life.
You know, people love to debate whether power corrupted Cromwell overnight, but honestly, it rarely happens that way, right? It happens one signature at a time. Cromwell didn't set out to be a tyrant. He actually entered public life believing knowledge could improve kingdoms. But as he realized himself, a man who solves enough problems eventually begins believing every single problem can be solved. That is the true temptation of power. It's not just pride, it's that dangerous certainty that intelligence alone can manage history. And knowledge, without humility, slowly morphs into something terrifying.
This brings us to a massive moral dilemma, the problem of scale. Before he had power, Cromwell was actually known to remember servants' names to protect people who were overlooked by society. But government changes scale, and scale changes morality. Sure, one widow deserves mercy, one hungry child invites charity. But what happens when 10,000 widows require administration, when an entire kingdom demands taxation and law? Governing ordinary people forces you to make ruthless choices, where literally every signature crossing your desk is going to harm someone. Power doesn't magically remove compassion, it just forces compassion to choose.
Which leads us right into the trap of efficiency. Think about it. The danger isn't simply waking up one day and deciding to be evil. It's believing that your practical, efficient decisions are automatically morally justified. As Anne Boleyn observed, when you are the one successfully cleaning up every crisis, people stop asking about your methods. The results just become proof of righteousness. When every problem disappears under your management, nobody asks how the solution was achieved.
Act 2. Faith, politics, and the true cost of loyalty. Does ambition demand the sacrifice of friends?
Moving beyond just the machinery of government, we really have to look at the human ties. Can gratitude actually survive political ambition? Take Cardinal Wolsey. When he lost the king's favor, basically everyone abandoned him. Everyone except Thomas Cromwell. And why? Well, not out of ambition, but out of genuine gratitude. Cromwell remembered that Wolsey saw his ability when others only saw a blacksmith's son. Success asks what you've accomplished, but loyalty asks who remained beside you when that accomplishment was gone. Success is honestly a poor measure of a life. True influence is about remembering someone's humanity when their achievements have completely vanished into thin air.
But, loyalty to a fallen friend is one thing. Enabling a king's desires is a whole different ballgame. We are often taught that the English Reformation was this great religious awakening. But let's be real for a second. It started because Henry wanted freedom from one marriage and certainty about another, and he cloaked the whole thing as divine law. On the flip side, you have Thomas More. Now, he famously defended his own spiritual continuity and conscience, but he totally denied that same freedom of conscience to the heretics he actively pursued and persecuted. It is such a stark contrast between weaponizing religion for personal gain and holding this inflexible and, sometimes hypocritical moral certainty.
And that is the brilliant, yet incredibly tragic, intersection of faith and politics. A crown couldn't just stand there and say, "I want this." It had to say, "God requires this." Because political power seeks sacred language. Sacred language commands far deeper obedience than just regular law.
Once political desire dresses itself up in that sacred language, disagreement isn't just disobedience anymore, it becomes a sin. The Reformation changed England because the faith was real, but it became so violent because politics learned how to speak in its voice to demand absolute obedience.
Act 3. The Judgment of History. Let's see how the future flattens complex lives into clean, simple symbols.
So, after all the executions are over, how does the future actually look back at these people? Well, the unfortunate reality is that history absolutely hates complexity. It wants clean characters. It flattens these incredibly messy lives into neat little boxes. Thomas More gets labeled the saint, completely erasing the fact that he pursued and imprisoned heretics. Thomas Cromwell gets branded the villain, completely ignoring his immense loyalty, his humanity towards servants, and his genuine reforms. And Anne Boleyn, she is reduced to the seductress, a label that totally dismisses her as a brilliant strategist constrained by a system that heavily punished clever women. Real people are rarely this convenient, but history just forces them into these tidy narratives anyway.
Anne Boleyn's posthumous defense is just incredibly powerful here. Every single quality required to survive the court became evidence against her. The ambition that was totally admired in a man was condemned as unnatural in a woman. If she negotiated, she was calculating. If she spoke sharply, she was cruel. Women in Tudor England were judged by completely impossible double standards. She wasn't just some passive victim or a wicked schemer. She was a woman destroyed by a power system that first invited her to play by its ruthless rules and then punished her for actually learning them. And why exactly do these distorted narratives survive? Because, as Cromwell astutely points out, every new government needs an old villain. It helps the present appear innocent. The victors control the ink. They use the defeated to excuse their own present-day cruelties and mistakes. The defeated become rumors, and the victors' accounts become the official historical record. Truth and stability are rarely the same thing, and power always ensures its own version of the story is the one passed down.
Which brings us to our final act. Act 4. A legacy beyond dust. What actually remains when crowns rust and castles crumble?
What really is the true measure of a life lived at the absolute heights of power? We talk about legacy as if it's a monument we can build and completely control. Think about Henry VIII. He spent his entire life obsessing over securing a male heir. But what actually happened? His daughters ended up defining England's future, and his reign just sparked generations of bitter conflict. Legacy is almost never what we intend to leave. It is entirely what survives after our intention, our reputation, and our power have been totally taken from us.
Because the future? It never asks for permission. We try so hard to secure our reputations. We build institutions. We carve our names in the stone. But reputations change. Titles vanish. And stone forgets. The idea that we can control the future is a complete illusion.
So if we absolutely cannot control how history remembers us, what should greatness actually mean? Well, it shouldn't just be about changing history, because anyone can change history for the worse. Perhaps the worthiest legacy, the only one that truly matters, is leaving behind a world where the next generation is less burdened by our fears. A world where institutions can correct their own mistakes and where the people who come after us simply possess more room to choose than we did.
Thomas Cromwell rose from a beaten child in a blacksmith's shop to the right hand of the king. He built the very machinery of a new England, and then, tragically, that same machinery destroyed him. So, I want to leave you with this to reflect on. In your own life, as your influence grows, do you still see the humanity in the decisions you make? And ultimately, what kind of legacy survives after every single throne has turned to dust?